Hello. I ordered a down-filled waistcoat from Amazon a couple of months ago. It hasn't arrived. So I contacted the supplier, who happens to be in China. "Dear customer," they said in response, "we are very sorry for the delay. Your parcel might have been lost on the way." Then they offered me a resend or a refund. I asked for a resend. I haven't had a response yet. And you know what? I'm not sure I'll get one. Because you see, the whole factory could have been shut down by now, couldn't it? But I wouldn't know, because the people running it would be under instruction not to tell me that the coronavirus has shut them down, or that they've lost half their workforce, or that the city is under quarantine, or anything. You can't talk about such things in China. If the boss happened to let out the state secret of mass illness, he'd probably find himself, well, unable to make bank transactions or buy a bus ticket, because that's how they control people in China. And we think that's bad, but it's just as bad here. There are things we can't talk about, and although there is no official way of stopping us from buying a bus ticket, there are certainly other ways of restricting our lives if we step out of line. Think of the politician who blew the whistle on the grooming gang scandal. She lost her place in the Labour cabinet. So, you know, there's more than one way to shut people up. China is dealing with the coronavirus in its usual Chinese way, that is, in secrecy. They're sealing off entire cities, restricting both movement and reportage. Apparently 80 million people are under these restrictions. Basically, that's 80 million people in quarantine. Also, if anyone dies of coronavirus, and probably of any other respiratory infection as well, disposal of the body will be by compulsory cremation, which is a rather clever solution to the problem of hiding the number of deaths. Meanwhile, the disease has got out into the wider world. Most countries are doing their best to prepare for it, but just as flu has a habit of seeking out the weakness in a victim's physical condition, rather physical constitution, and exploiting it, so epidemics have a habit of seeking out the weaknesses in societies and exploiting them. The societies that are badly organised, that are corrupt, that are inefficient, the ones that don't allow you to talk about problems, they're the ones that will be hit the hardest. And that's because such societies are, generally speaking, the ones where there are no preparations, because you can't talk about the problems. So in China, for instance, this whole thing could have been stopped in its tracks if the doctors who first identified the problem had been allowed to raise the alarm. They were not. Dr. Li Wenliang, he was arrested and imprisoned for warning colleagues on a chat group. That he wasn't going to the papers or anything, it was a professional chat group. But he was arrested anyway and imprisoned when he started talking or telling them to beware of a new virus. Ironically enough, that kept him alive for a few more weeks, because when the problem became too widespread to ignore, they let him out. Dr. Li went back to work, got the infection, and died at the beginning of February. Now, we here in the West are aware of this infection as a distant thing at present, and with only a few people having it, and there's no way of knowing how it will spread here. But I can speculate that there are parts, for instance, of America where this virus, well, it could be extremely spectacular, and that's in places like Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles. That is, in places where there are many homeless people with a set of existing medical problems, from psychiatric illnesses and drug addiction to just simple weaknesses caused by poor nutrition and exposure. And they're all living in crowded camps on heavily trafficked streets. All it would take would be one person, just one. It would be interesting to see how the right-on city councils of these places might handle such an outbreak if it happens. But I suspect that we'll have a Chinese rerun there. That is, they never did want to admit they had a problem, but as Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings. And I have an idea that facts are going to jump up and bite some of these people on the nose quite hard and fairly soon. The problem there, of course, is that house arrest, city quarantines and forced cremations aren't possible in America, not in the same way they are in China. Now, to go on to another country that's being hit by this, Iran. It's in trouble. It's the perfect Islamic society, and all the people running it are good Muslims who cannot be criticised. And they didn't admit they had a problem until last week, when the 6th person died. Furthermore, they insisted on carrying on with the local elections, and so gathering people together in groups and crowds, which is probably not a good idea. The thing is that Iran has a crumbling state apparatus. It couldn't even handle the floods a couple of months ago. They're not going to be able to handle a full-scale epidemic, that's for sure. You see, epidemics like this exploit not only the weaknesses in the body of a human victim, they exploit the weaknesses in the body politic as well. It might peter out. It is, after all, just flu, but it could get very bad indeed. And we have to remember why it happened. It happened because of lack of freedom of speech. That is what it boils down to. I know that sounds like a triviality in the face of an illness which is a matter of life and death, but in my opinion, and that of one or two others as well, just one or two others, freedom of speech is actually a matter of life and death. Freedom to speak as you see, whatever the official line, is important so you can identify, well, rape among British working class children. You've had an epidemic of that, haven't you? Anti-Semitism in our UK Labour Party, we've had an epidemic of that. Bullying by trans activists, the Harry the Owl case, you know, that Twitter thing where the police rang this man up because he'd made a wrong speak tweet. That's also becoming an epidemic, and problems of uncontrolled immigration. That's an epidemic in many parts of the EU. You can't talk about any of those things. In fact, anything you're not supposed to talk about is the thing that's going to cause the worst problem. Because viruses thrive where they're not acknowledged and isolated. Viruses of any sort. Just ask Dr. Lee. If you want to donate or contact, the information will be rolling over the Graniopteryx as I speak. Please like, subscribe and share because it does help with the algorithm. If you visit my channel on YouTube and one day discover that I've disappeared without warning, you'll still find me on BitChute or Minds. Just go to either of those platforms and do a search for Graniopteryx. If you're already watching this on BitChute or Minds, good for you. Meanwhile, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember that you must keep checking the subscribe and bell icons because occasionally they reset. Till next time.